Say it again, Theo whispered, his forehead nearly touching mine, our breath mixing in the cold night air. Say you don't feel this too, and I'll walk away right now. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. Because for the first time in 23 years, I didn't have a single lie left in me. That moment, standing on a rooftop in the rain, 3 days before he was supposed to leave the city forever, is where this story really begins. But to understand how we got there, you have to go back to the summer everything changed. Back to the boy who taught me that some people don't just walk into your life. They rearrange it. My name is Julian Reyes, and until the summer I turned 22, I thought I had my whole life figured out. I had a job I liked well enough, a small apartment above a laundromat that always smelled like fabric softener, and exactly zero interest in falling for anyone. Love, to me, was something that happened to other people, the kind of thing you read about, not the kind of thing that finds you standing in a grocery store aisle at 11 at night, arguing with a stranger over the last carton of orange juice. I got here first, he said, not even looking up from his phone, one hand already closing around the carton. You did not. I've been standing here for a full minute deciding. That got his attention. He looked up, and something in his expression shifted, like he was recalibrating an assumption he hadn't realized he'd made. He had dark, tired eyes and the kind of smile that seemed to happen by accident, like it surprised even him. Deciding about orange juice, he said slowly, for a full minute. It's a big decision. Pulp or no pulp. Some people can't handle that kind of pressure. He laughed, a real laugh, short and startled out of him, and slid the carton across the shelf toward me. Take it. I respect the commitment. That should have been the end of it. Two strangers, one carton of orange juice, a mildly funny story to tell no one in particular. But when I turned to leave, he was still standing there, hands in his pockets, watching me with an expression I couldn't read yet, though I'd spend the next several months learning every version of it. I'm Theo, he said. I just moved in. 2 floors up from you, I think. I saw you unloading boxes last week. Julian. I shifted the orange juice to my other hand, suddenly aware of how badly I wanted this conversation to continue and how little sense that made. You were watching me unload boxes? I was watching my new neighbor unload boxes, he corrected, though the color that crept up his neck told a slightly different story. There's a difference. I didn't push it. Not that night. But I thought about him more than I wanted to admit as I climbed the stairs back to my apartment, orange juice sweating in my hand, his laugh still echoing somewhere behind my ribs. I told myself it was nothing. New neighbors talk. That's just what neighbors do. I was wrong, of course. But I wouldn't understand how wrong for another 3 weeks. It started with small things, the kind of things you don't notice piling up until you look back and realize they'd built an entire structure around your heart. Theo started leaving his door open on Sunday mornings, the smell of coffee drifting into the stairwell like an invitation. I started finding reasons to walk past. He'd wave me in without asking, hand me a mug like it was something we'd always done, and we'd sit on his fire escape with our knees almost touching, talking about nothing and everything until the coffee went cold. He worked as a sound engineer at a small studio downtown, recording indie bands who'd probably never make it big but believed they would anyway. He loved that about them, he told me once, the belief. Most people give up on things way too early, he said, looking out at the skyline instead of at me. I like being around people who haven't learned that yet. I was a high school English teacher, which he found endlessly amusing. So you spend your whole day trying to convince 17-year-olds that Gatsby means something, he said one evening, grinning around the rim of his mug. It does mean something. Sure. Tell that to the kid sleeping in the back row. He's not sleeping. He's processing. Theo laughed so hard he nearly spilled his coffee, and I felt something warm unfurl in my chest that I quickly, deliberately, refused to name. We became friends fast, the kind of fast that should have worried me. Movie nights that turned into all-night conversations. Grocery runs that took 2 hours because we kept getting distracted comparing opinions on cereal brands, on music, on whether pineapple belonged on pizza. It did, I insisted. He disagreed with the passion of a man personally wronged by fruit. It was easy. Too easy, maybe. Because somewhere in those weeks, without my permission, I stopped thinking of him as my neighbor and started thinking of him as mine, not in any way I let myself examine too closely, just in the quiet, proprietary way you think of the people who've become essential to your days. I noticed things I had no business noticing. The way his eyes crinkled when something genuinely delighted him, different from his polite laugh. The way he chewed his bottom lip when he was concentrating on a track in his headphones. The way he'd absent-mindedly reach over and fix my collar or brush lint off my shoulder, like touching me required no permission because it had never occurred to him it might mean anything. It meant something to me. That was the problem. The first almost moment happened on a night in late July, humid and electric with a storm that never quite broke. We were on his fire escape again, but closer this time, closer than usual, our shoulders pressed together against the small platform, a bottle of cheap wine between us that neither of us had bothered with a glass for. "Can I tell you something weird?" Theo asked, voice quieter than the noise of the city below. "Always. I don't think I've ever had a friend like you." He turned to look at me, and in the orange wash of the streetlight his face looked softer, more open than I'd seen it. "Someone I actually want to be around all the time. Usually I get bored of people. I haven't gotten bored of you once." "Give it time," I said, deflecting the way I always did when something felt too big to hold steady. "I mean it, Julian." His voice dropped, and something in it made my pulse stumble. "I think about you more than I probably should." The air between us went very still. I could feel his breath, could see the exact moment his gaze dropped to my mouth and then, almost guiltily, away. My heart was doing something violent and unfamiliar against my ribs. If I leaned in just a few inches, I could find out what his next words tasted like instead of hearing them. I didn't move. Neither did he. We sat there, suspended in that impossible closeness, both of us too afraid to be the one who closed the distance and too honest with ourselves to pretend we didn't want to. A crack of thunder finally broke the spell. Theo blinked, looked away first, and laughed, too fast, too bright, papering over whatever had almost happened. "We should get inside before it pours." "Yeah," I said, my voice not quite steady. "Probably should." Neither of us moved for another full minute. That night I lay awake long after I should have been asleep, replaying it, the look in his eyes, the words he almost said, the space between us that had felt, for one suspended second, like the only thing in the world worth crossing. I told myself it didn't mean what I thought it meant. I told myself a lot of things that summer that turned out not to be true. Here's the thing about almost moments: if you don't name them, they don't disappear. They just wait, quietly, gathering weight, until something forces them into the open. For us, that something was Marcus. He showed up at one of Theo's studio showcases in August, tall, confident, effortlessly charming in the way people are when they've never had to work for anyone's attention. He put his hand on Theo's shoulder like he had a claim to it, and something ugly and unfamiliar twisted in my stomach. "Marcus produces for the label upstairs," Theo explained later, an odd note in his voice I couldn't place. "He asked me to grab a drink sometime." "That's great," I said, and hated how flat it came out. Theo studied me for a second too long. "Is it? Why wouldn't it be?" He didn't answer. He just nodded slowly, like he'd learned something he wasn't sure what to do with, and changed the subject. After that, something between us went quietly wrong. Not broken, exactly, more like a hairline crack you can ignore until you can't. Our Sunday coffees got shorter. His door stayed closed more mornings than not. When I did see him, there was a careful politeness that hadn't existed between us before, a distance dressed up as respect for each other's schedules. I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself the tight feeling in my chest whenever I saw his name light up my phone was nothing. I told myself a lot of things, and none of them were the truth, which was simpler and far more terrifying than any excuse I could construct. I was jealous. Not of Marcus's confidence, not of his job. Jealous of the hand on Theo's shoulder. Jealous of anyone who got to want him without hiding it. I was in love with my best friend, and I had been for weeks, maybe longer, and I had absolutely no idea what to do about it. My sister Elena visited in early September, and it took her exactly one dinner to see what I'd spent weeks refusing to. "You talk about him like," she paused over her pasta, choosing her words. "Like you talk about no one else, Julian. Not even your exes." Theo's my friend. Right. She didn't look convinced. And when's the last time your voice did that when you talked about a friend? Did what? That thing. She gestured vaguely at my whole face. That thing it's doing right now. I set my fork down, suddenly not hungry. It doesn't matter what I feel. He's not, I don't even know if it doesn't matter, Elena. It matters if it's true, she said gently. You don't have to do anything about it. But pretending it isn't there isn't protecting you from anything. It's just costing you the truth. I thought about that long after she'd gone home. About all the ways I'd been quietly costing myself the truth for months, the almost moment I'd talked myself out of remembering correctly, the jealousy I'd renamed as nothing, the way I flinched every time Theo mentioned Marcus like it was a wound I refused to acknowledge having. I didn't do anything with that truth right away. I wasn't brave enough yet. But I stopped lying to myself about what it was, and somehow that felt like the harder, more important step. It was Theo who finally forced the truth into daylight, 3 weeks later, on a night neither of us saw coming. I'd gone up to his apartment to return a jacket he'd left at my place, expecting the usual careful politeness we'd settled into. Instead, I found him sitting on his kitchen floor, back against the cabinets, a half-finished bottle of wine beside him and an expression on his face like something had cracked open. Marcus and I are done, he said, before I'd even gotten the door closed. Turns out I spent the whole date thinking about someone else. Seemed unfair to keep pretending otherwise. I stood frozen in the doorway. Theo. Don't. He looked up at me, eyes glassy but focused, unflinching in a way that made my breath catch. Don't do the thing where you make it easier for both of us to keep not saying it. I'm so tired of not saying it, Julian. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. Saying what? That it's you. His voice cracked on the last word, raw and unguarded in a way I'd never heard from him. It's been you since the orange juice. I've been trying to talk myself out of it for months because I didn't want to lose you if I was wrong about what that night on the fire escape meant. But I can't do it anymore. I can't sit 2 feet away from you and pretend I don't want to close the distance every single time. I crossed the kitchen before I'd consciously decided to move, sank down onto the floor across from him, close enough now that our knees touched the way they had that stormy July night, except this time, neither of us was waiting for thunder to give us an excuse to pull away. I thought I was losing my mind, I admitted, my own voice unsteady. I thought I made that night up. I thought I was the only one who. You weren't the only one. He reached out, hesitant, and brushed his knuckles along my jaw, the same careless but not careless touch he'd given me 100 times before, except now it meant everything it had always almost meant. I'd never wanted anything the way I want this. Want you. I just needed to stop being a coward about it. You're not a coward. I covered his hand with mine, holding it against my face. You're the bravest person I know. You just needed the right moment. Is this the right moment? His voice was barely above a whisper now, his forehead resting against mine, close enough that I could feel him trembling, or maybe that was me. I think, I said, this is the only moment that's ever mattered. He kissed me then, soft at first, like a question, and then with the aching certainty of someone who'd spent months rehearsing a truth he'd been too afraid to speak. I kissed him back like I'd been waiting my whole life without knowing it, because I had been, and neither of us pulled away until long after the wine had gone warm and forgotten on the floor beside us. Some things you don't need daylight to understand. You just need to stop running from them. For a few weeks after that night, everything was golden. We stopped pretending. His door was always open now, not just on Sundays. My apartment above the laundromat started to feel like just a place I kept my things, because home had quietly relocated 2 floors up, into a kitchen that still smelled faintly of spilled wine and a version of honesty neither of us had thought we were brave enough for. But love, real love, the kind that actually costs you something, rarely stays easy for long. And ours was about to be tested in a way neither of us had prepared for. It came in the form of a phone call, on an ordinary Tuesday evening, that changed everything. Theo's studio was expanding, opening a second location, 3 states away, in a city that might as well have been another planet for how far it felt. They wanted him to run it. It was the kind of opportunity he'd worked years for, the kind you don't get offered twice. I haven't said yes, he told me that night, sitting across from me at his kitchen table, the same table where everything had finally been said out loud weeks before. I wanted to talk to you first. Theo, this is everything you've wanted. You're everything I've wanted. His jaw was tight, his eyes searching mine like he was looking for permission to want two things at once. I don't know how to choose. Then don't choose yet, I said, though something cold was already settling in my chest. Take the time. Think it through. But I could see it in his face, the way ambition and love were pulling him in opposite directions, and how much it was tearing him apart to admit that either choice would cost him something he wasn't ready to lose. The next 2 weeks were the hardest of the whole summer. Not because we fought, we barely did, but because of the silence that crept in around the edges of everything we didn't say. I watched him pack for interviews he hadn't scheduled yet. He watched me pretend I wasn't counting down days like a countdown to something ending. You're pulling away, I said finally, one night when the silence had gone on too long. You're already leaving, even if you haven't left yet. I don't know how to hold both things, he admitted, voice breaking. I don't know how to want my career and want you without one of them losing. Then stop trying to protect me from your decision, I said, my own voice shaking now. Just tell me the truth, even if it's the one I don't want to hear. He didn't answer that night. He just walked out onto the fire escape alone, and I let him, because some things a person has to sit with by themselves before they can say them out loud. 3 days before his decision was due to the studio, it rained, the kind of sudden, heavy storm that clears a city in minutes. I found him on the building's rooftop, soaked through, staring out at the skyline like it held an answer he hadn't found anywhere else. You'll catch a cold, I said, climbing the last step onto the roof. I needed to think. Did it help? He turned to look at me, rain running down his face, and for a moment I couldn't tell if what was on his cheeks was rain or something else. I keep thinking about the orange juice, he said, an unsteady laugh escaping him. Out of every grocery store in the city, I picked that one. That night. That exact carton. Theo. I'm not scared of the distance, he said, cutting me off, crossing the rooftop until there was almost nothing left between us. I'm scared of the version of my life where I chase something impressive and lose the one thing that actually made me happy. I've spent my whole life being scared of standing still. And then I met you, and standing still with you felt like the first thing I've ever wanted more than moving forward. My heart was pounding so hard it hurt. What are you saying? Say it again, he whispered, forehead nearly touching mine, our breath mixing in the cold rain-soaked air. Say you don't feel this too, and I'll walk away right now. I'll take the job, and I'll try to be okay, and I'll never bring this up again. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. Because for the first time in 23 years, I didn't have a single lie left in me. Instead, I reached up, cradled his rain-soaked face in both hands, and kissed him, slow and certain, answering the only way that felt honest. When we finally broke apart, both of us breathless, he rested his forehead against mine and let out a shaky laugh. I turned the job down this afternoon, he admitted quietly. Before I even came up here. I think some part of me already knew what I wanted. I just needed to hear you say it too. You didn't have to give it up for me. I didn't give it up for you, he corrected gently, brushing a thumb along my cheekbone. I chose it for us. There's a difference. And for the first time, choosing something didn't feel like losing anything at all. The rain kept falling around us, but neither of us moved to get out of it. Some moments are worth staying soaked for. Theo didn't leave for that other city. He negotiated a compromise instead, building the studio's second branch remotely, flying out for stretches at a time, but always coming home. Always choosing the fire escape, the Sunday coffee, the small kitchen that still smells faintly of wine and honesty. We didn't have some perfect, cinematic ending where every hard conversation disappeared. We still argue about pineapple on pizza. We still have hard days. But every night, without fail, his door is open before I even get there, coffee already poured, like it always has been, like maybe it always was going to be. I used to think soulmates were something people made up to feel less alone in a world that mostly disappoints you. I don't think that anymore. I think somewhere out there, for each of us, there's someone who turns an ordinary Tuesday in a grocery store into the beginning of everything. Mine picked the last carton of orange juice. and he's never put it down since.